This session focuses on public and community involvement engagement, or PCIE for short.
I just want to introduce you to the team. So we have Nadia, you've just met. She's the co-production theme lead, our strategic lead for the ARC around all things to do with public involvement and public members. Myself, my name is Pippa Shaw. I'm the team lead. So we do the more operational day-to-day stuff of actually how do you connect with people? How do you get on with people? How do you find them? How do you pay them? Those kind of nuts and bolts questions. Those are the things we're going to be talking about this afternoon. And with me on my team, I have Kat and Beth. If you'd like to email us at our email, which is publicinvolvement@sussexpartnership.nhs.uk. So really the hub of today is talking about public involvement. We're really not going to touch very much on community engagement or participation, and we'll talk about those terms in a minute. But we're looking at what is it? Why would you want to do it? How do you do it? And who do you use? So one of the things to clear up, or a couple of things to clear up before we start, is about terminology. And I find that there causes a lot of confusion for people about exactly what these abbreviations mean. So you might have heard it called PPI, PCIE, public involvement, PPIE, engagement, lay involvement. You know, people that are involved in this could be lay applicants, lay members, public contributors, public advisors. Actually, you know, a lot of the time that's all exactly the same, well, pretty much the same thing. We like to use the term PCIE here at ARC, mainly because we are aiming our research at people and communities within our region, people who are living with disability, whether that's physical disability or mental health disability. Maybe they're carers for people who have conditions of dementia or frailty. They're not necessarily patients. They do have conditions. A lot of them have diagnosable conditions, but we're more interested in using those people in the capacity of living a normal life in the community. And that's why we choose to use public and community involvement rather than patient and public involvement. Next slide, please. So this just confirms what I've just said. We use the term public. That can be patients, potential patients. We're all potential patients, people who use the service, carers of people who use the service. But actually more important, or as importantly, is people from organisations that represent people who use services. So that might be community groups, or people who are just have an interest in research, or members of a professional, one of the professional members of health and social care services in the past, but are no longer in that role. So public can mean anybody from any of those backgrounds, and community could be any group of people. Initially, you tend to think of geographical communities, towns, villages, housing estates, but actually that can equally relate to communities where people have shared beliefs, shared behaviours, online communities, all sorts of different types of people who group together with a common identity. Thank you. Okay, and in terms, again, I'm sure you all know this, so I'm just going to very briefly reiterate it, because different organisations will use these words in different ways. You know, what does participation mean to some people? Well, actually here at the ARC, in terms of research, participation we refer to as the people that are actually taking part in the studies. And it's something that we leave that down to the research teams to really organise, that we can help with. Engagement is about that discussion with people and communities about what's important to them. Sharing, and for me, it's very much about sharing, a two-way process. So not just us telling them what we think, but listening to what they think to get some initial ideas. Very important part of any research cycle at the beginning. But more important, what we're concentrating on here is involvement, actually using members of the public in our research projects and in your organisation. So there's lots of roles that public members can play within the organisation's governance, and we have an advisory group here that we're now calling the PIN, the Public Involvement Network. But for the purpose of today, where we're focusing on research, we will be looking at what roles can the public help you with in terms of your research project and some of the roles that they can play within your research cycle. Thank you. Next one. Okay, so for people maybe who aren't that familiar or already signed up to the idea of using public members in your research, the first question I often hear is, why? Why would I want to ask people when they're just going to come up with different ideas to what I've already thought out? They're going to come up with challenges that I'll need to think about. Where do I find these people? How do I pay them? You know, there's lots of arguments about how difficult it can be to involve the public in your research. But actually, there's some really good underlying principles about why we should try that little bit harder. So a democratic principle, well, you know, most of our research that we're involved in, I guess, is around health and social care services that, you know, people are using, they're paid for out of the public purse. The research is often funded by NIHR, which is a publicly funded body. And so really, and we're doing research about people who have particular issues or conditions or live in certain situations. Do they not have a right to be part of that? It's their money, it's their services we're talking about, it's their lives that we're assuming they live in a certain way. They really need to be involved. They can really bring a different perspective. So however experienced you are in your field of interest, however many research projects you've been on, it never fails to amaze me how, when you've got public members in your room, how they manage to come up with something you've never thought of, seeing things from a different way. And that can really be refreshing. So they do really bring a different perspective. And that leads into making your research more relevant, because if you're asking them, what is their view on this? What are they interested in? What is their problems from their perspective? You know, incorporating that into your research makes your research so much more relevant, and can help you to really shape your research in a way that becomes usable. And that's really what we're about. It's making research relevant so that at the end of the day, when you come up with some amazing evidence, you know, people are really interested in implementing that into new service design. Communities are on board with buying into using those new services. And so really stemming that from what's important to people. Improving the quality of your research. They can help you to make your language accessible, which means that you can involve different types of communities. They can help you to understand whether your research methodology is going to be relevant for the communities that you're aiming your research at. They can even help with possibly connecting you with groups of people that could be participants in your study, improving the depth and breadth of responses you get to help improve the quality of your research, not least to say that actually public involvement in some description is really a requirement of most funding bodies these days, and certainly it is for the NIHR funding pools. So, and we're getting much better at reviewing what people write in their bids about public involvement and trying to work out who is really meaningfully involving the public in their research, rather than just saying that they will contact the relevant group at the relevant time. We need, you know, you need to really show that you've already made contact with people and you've got an idea about how you're going to go about that. Okay, next slide. So that was the why. Is how. How do you involve people, or where do you involve them? So looking at the research cycle, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. I don't know whether you can read that. That's quite small print, I'm afraid, but I will kind of talk you through it very briefly. Now, this might depend on where you come in to your project during this cycle. And I'm well aware that ideally, you know, it would be nice to start from identifying and prioritizing. But for some people, you know, you get brought into a project halfway through the process for whatever reasons, and decisions have already been made. And it's therefore quite difficult at points to bring public involvement in if it hasn't already been designed in. But please, there is always scope to involve people. And our advisors are very pragmatic. And although they'd love to be involved with you right at the beginning in identifying and prioritizing, they well understand that there's a lot of structural barriers to how much flexibility researchers have in their projects, but they would be delighted to be invited to comment at any point in the process. So please don't feel that just because you're coming into a project halfway through, that you can't instigate some public involvement even at that stage. So looking at identifying and prioritizing, yes, this is the best place to start, really, I guess, is, you know, working out, as we've said before, what is it that is important to people? Excuse me. If it's important to people, they're going to be more engaged with it. What is important to providers and stakeholders, and what is interesting to academics? If we can get all three of those groups on board to discuss things together and come up with some priorities to research, that's brilliant. And we've had some really good examples here recently at the ARC of where they've done some prioritization, and they've really sat down and presented some suggestions and ideas to public members, community groups, and asked their opinion and really listened to the answer. So that's brilliant to think that that is going to be underpinning some of their decisions about where they focus their energies in the future for their research. At the design stage, definitely think about including people, public members on your team. They don't need to be co-applicants if that's not appropriate for you, although it's great if you can have somebody as a co-applicant. But even if you just have them on your team to help review your design of your methodology, of your surveys, of your questionnaires, making sure that, as I said before, the language is appropriate, that you've considered any cultural barriers for the particular groups that you're looking at. And it's got here assist with recruitment strategy, connecting with local communities. It's quite difficult sometimes to get engagement with local groups, particularly if you cold call them. So if you just look on the internet and come up with a group that appears to be relevant to your topic, your research project, just ringing them or emailing them is likely not to get a very good response. If you've got a connector, you've got somebody who's got connections with that group, a trusted person that they know, you're much more likely to get some response from them. And public members can really be those connectors for you. In terms of undertaking the project and analysing and interpreting data, again, this might need a bit of upskilling of some members of the public, but the more we upskill them in one project, we hope that those skills can transfer to the next one. You would be surprised the skills and the knowledge level that a lot of these public members have already got. I've had some great conversations with people who have fantastic IT skills, some fantastic creative skills that they could use for your project. It's amazing what people bring with them that you can utilize, as well as thinking about how you might be able to help train them up to help you with focus groups, with interpreting, that's interpreting with people who don't speak English as a first language, but also maybe interpreting data. If you show them your results, they may have a different idea about why you've come up with the results you have. Always an interesting view. In terms of dissemination, getting that information back out to the public, really important. One of the biggest criticisms we get from public members is that we get asked at the beginning of the process to be involved. We never hear from people again. We don't even know if the project got funded. So please involve these people all the way through your project. Think about where you're going to use them next and keep them in the loop. They're going to be brilliant at helping you get that information back out to the communities that they're part of and help you with the dissemination and also with the implementation. It's amazing how powerful a public member's story is in terms of at a presentation when you're trying to feed back to service providers or your commissioners or your funding bodies or your academic circles, to have a real true life story about how someone's been involved and that's affected the research can be really powerful. So please think about how you can use them in that way too. I hope I've given you some ideas there about where and how you can use public members. Just some few points really about when you are thinking about engaging with public members. There are some basic principles that I'd like to just highlight to you. So if we can have the next slide. These tie in to a lot of the information in the last two sessions around co-production about how it's involving people, really respecting them. How do you communicate with them? How do you engage with them? How do you listen with them? And how flexible are you to really take on their suggestions? The NIHR have produced a set of UK standards of public involvement, 6 of them. And just to go through them very briefly, things you need to think about when you're going to, when you're putting together a PCIE plan or you're about to engage with public members to become part of your project team. So if we start with inclusive opportunities at the bottom, just think about how are you going to find people, where are you going to advertise these opportunities? Are you going to use people that you've used before, which is not a bad shout because they will have lots of knowledge. They will know how you work. You'll know lots of confidence and trust in each other, building on a relationship that you've already started. But what's also important is that you look wider than that and you look at what is your project, who are you trying to involve, and are you hearing representation from all the people in the population that you are trying to address? And we do need to remember the underrepresented groups that so often get left out because they're not so willing to respond to the usual requests that go out in the usual way. So please just think about, are you offering out your opportunities in an inclusive way? Working together, this is about valuing all the contributions that get brought to the room. So, if you're asking people to come along and share their opinions, at least please listen. You may not always be in a position to use those thoughts and those opinions may not always lead to a change in your processes, but at least listen to them and treat them respectfully and help and try to nurture those relationships that get started because, they're going to be so useful for you further down the line. Think about support and learning and building the skills and the confidence of these public members, again, so that we can develop a really good cohort of public contributors across the region that can be called on to help with all sorts of projects. And what can we offer in return? Maybe some training, some feedback, some mentoring, all those kind of things that help with learning and supporting of our public members. Communication, again, just talking about the use of language. If you're inviting people along to a meeting, one of your research, you're inviting them to be part of your research team, your project, then try and use language that they're going to understand. If you need to use a lot of medical terminology or abbreviations, maybe think about giving them a jargon buster sheet before they come you know, maybe thinking about talking to them beforehand about how they're going to access your meeting. Do they have the technology, abilities and infrastructure, you know, software that they can actually get onto these meetings adequately? And sometimes a conversation with these people in advance of the meeting, or a focus group or a community of practice or whatever it is you're planning, is really positive and helpful. So talking about impact, a really important point at the moment is trying to show impact. So we will be talking about this a little bit more later. Just try to remember to plan in right from the word go how you are going to show or assess impact, or at least what is the impact you're trying to achieve. So just hold that thought. And then governance, yes, they're there to help us have an oversight, an outside view, a balcony view, whatever you want to call it, someone who can kind of see what's going on, see through the wood for the trees, all those kind of things, just to help you make sure you stay focused on what it is that you said you would do, and use the money that you said in the way that you said you were going to do it. And we do that here within the ARC through our public advisory group, our PIN. But you may well find that you need to think about that within your project, and do include your public member in that. It's really helpful. Okay, so next slide is around who are all these people? And I just want to say that no matter what we call them, public contributors, public advisors, lay members, members of the public, they're all people who are willing to help us do better research. And I'm just really delighted today to say that one of our public advisors from the ARC here, Karen, has agreed to come and share with us, you know, why she got involved and what she's been doing and how she hopes to help us in our research. So Karen, who's again at home as most of us are, thank you so much for joining us. I'm delighted you're here. And I'm going to ask you a few questions, which I'm hoping you're going to be able to share some answers with us. So the first one is, why did you become involved? That's with us here at the ARC, KSS. And what does being a public advisor mean to you?
Well, hello, everyone. I first became involved because I'm a former carer for my mum, who had vascular dementia as the result of a hemorrhagic stroke. And I cared for her for about 4 years until she fell and broke her hip at home. She lived in the council house. I didn't live with her. And then she went into hospital. I spent 4 months battling against the system to try and get her back into her council house that she'd lived in of 62 years. Then I had to, all by myself, I was the sole carer, no other family apart from my husband. We had to then source private care at home that was part funded by the social services. Then when that became too, I wasn't able to do that anymore, I then had to source a suitable specialist dementia care home. I did all this without any help from anyone really, because I was just battling the system completely the whole time. And I didn't want anyone, when I finally got through it all, I didn't want anyone to have to go through what I went through. So when I found out I could become involved and help other people, I jumped at it really, because for me, being a public advisor means I can influence future research and future ways of working. And I thought, even if I just say something, it's better than saying nothing. Nothing will change if you don't speak out. And I personally think the minority can help influence the majority, because by staying silent, you're not helping anyone. So nothing ever changes.
Thank you for your positivity there, Karen. And I think you're right, but it's sometimes having the confidence to put yourself forward. So well done. What have you been asked to do as a public advisor so far?
Oh gosh, lots really. I've attended meetings with PhD students and helped advise them on their on their projects. I've attended communications meetings, helping to comment on what I thought of the ARC KSS website, commenting on patient and public involvement leaflets, giving my two penneth in, so shall we say. I was selected for a panel to judge academic posters, which was really, really interesting. And I also, although I'm a public theme advisor for the dementia theme, I also have got involved with the social care focus groups, and I got selected to be on a national panel, a big meeting a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, voting on the most important areas to focus on within the social and healthcare system. And that was really, really interesting for me as well as a member of the public.
It's I was on that one as well, Karen. It was really interesting, and you know, it was one of those meetings where they were really asking people's opinions about where they should focus their energy and their money in the next few years. So really, really helpful. Thank you. And what a variety of stuff. So it's not a boring role, is it? Really, if you're willing to get involved. How do you feel your role has affected the research?
I think my role in it has. So I think I've helped people like researchers to look at their study through fresh eyes. I am aware that some of the researchers may also be carers or former carers themselves. But I do think, like, if we all put our voices together to get the bigger picture, everyone, like, we all have different experiences and we all come in at it from different angles. But amongst those experiences, there'd be common themes, and then the researchers can help sort of pick out those common themes that would be, and then apply it to their own research. So I think the more voices, the better, really.
Thank you, absolutely. And I know that most of the people on the call today are probably researchers themselves, but if there's anybody else out there, anybody listening, and if they'd like to get involved, have you got any advice for them?
Yeah, I would say just go on the ARC KSS website and ask for one of the PCIE team, because they're very helpful, and they get in contact with you and tell you how best to you can become involved. And I'd say it's really interesting. Go for it.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much for joining us today and to sharing your personal insights, but also giving us some enthusiasm for involving the public in the future. So thank you so much. Can we go?
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Okay, so really in a nutshell, the public contributors or public members can help in several ways. They bring expert knowledge, either through their lived experience or carers' experience, or they may bring it through occupational knowledge and skills where they've previously worked in the area. There's a degree of citizenship where they are representatives of the public purse and really just there to ensure that they have a say in how it's spent and doing the best for their communities and literally the communities that they're involved with. But also being outsider, a fresh pair of eyes, we've already talked about. I like the term critical friend. And when we think about what a critical friend means, it's somebody who actually will tell you the truth. You know, if you're going out for an evening out with your girlfriends, and you've got your skirt tucked in your knickers, wouldn't you prefer someone to tell you that before you go out, rather than at the end of the evening when some random person will come and tell you? It's really, you know, somebody telling you the home truths in the confines of your meetings before you publish your reports, and time to maybe make some changes. So really listen to them. And the other role I really like the sound of is being a boundary spanner. And this is literally spanning the boundaries between professionals, researchers, and those relevant public members and community groups. They are your link. They are your link out there into communities and can help you with that. So that's definitely a really positive role for them. Okay, so moving on. One of the biggest things I get asked a lot about, budgeting is one of the biggest problems that people face because there's never enough money in the pot. And on the one hand, you're being told that you have to respect public members' advice and experience and pay them. And on the other hand, you're saying, well, where do I find the money? And do you know what? I don't have all the answers. This is a bigger problem than mine. It's a bigger problem than the ARC. It's a bigger problem than the NIHR. So we all work the best we can to find a way through. The biggest thing I would say is plan your budget in advance and do not underestimate it. We heard this morning from Nadia and from Caroline about the biggest barriers to co-production is resources. And basically that's time, but also money. So, you know, when you're putting a funding bid together, when you're asking for money, be realistic about what it's all going to cost you, because once you've asked for the money, it's quite tricky to go back and ask for more. One of the biggest underlying issues we need to consider is that members of the public are not financially worse off as a result of being involved in your research. So, you know, at the very least, you need to consider expenses. You need to consider people who are on benefits, because the benefit system will penalize people if they're getting an income from elsewhere. Give people the option of how they want to be paid. Do they want to be paid? Maybe they just want to do it voluntarily because they don't want to upset the system that they're on. But as long as we're clear about that from the offset, you know, when you're asking people to join your project team or even just come along to a focus group, be really clear with them about what it is you're offering them. How much time you can afford to pay them? You know, how are they going to join? What rate of payment are they going to get? And physically, how are they going to get that payment? And these are things that you need to think about when you're setting up your public involvement. And I can't give you concrete answers today, because this will depend on which organisation the funding is coming from for your research. Now, here at the ARC, when we use public members for our core work, our governance work, our oversight work, and for some of our theme work, we are dictated by our trust policy, and we need to adhere to that. For projects, very often you need to adhere to your university policies. So you really need to find out where the money is and which organisation it's coming through, and what are the policies that you need to be clear about so that you know how to pay people and how much is expected to be paid. The NIHR has recently brought out some new guidance about payment for public involvement in research, but I would hasten to add it is guidance, because they too have hit the barrier that each organisation has its own rules. So they've come up with some good practice and some guidance, which is definitely a place to start. But unfortunately, it's still not clear cut, and it is down to each individual organisation. Next slide, please. There are other ways that we can also think about recognizing people's input, and sometimes just a thank you is enough. It's about being involved, you know, feeding back to them about how they helped in a project. Maybe there are learning and development opportunities. We talked about sharing and learning earlier on. You know, people may find that they just want to gain skills and contacts and networks and friendships and relationships, and that's enough for them. So please, you know, be open to all sorts of different ways of acknowledging people's input, making sure that they are acknowledged in any written work that you've done, and finding some way of celebrating their successes with them as well, because they're all part of this process with us. Next slide, please. So that leads on to feedback. Okay, so it's really important that you think about how you feedback to your public members. What is feedback? Information given back to a person about their comments or a performance on a task, but it's also asking them about what it felt like for them to be part of your process. So it's definitely a two-way process. Why is feedback important? Well, apart from the obvious of showing courtesy and respect, it really helps to increase the confidence of public members to hear about how their input made a difference. It helps to keep people motivated and engaged so that they'll carry on working with your team and feel part of your team and come back to help you on the next project as well. So it just helps build those good relationships. What sort of feedback is required? Well, that can be anything from a basic thank you to just a chat at the end of a meeting, maybe a post-meeting debrief. You arrange to meet them afterwards to talk about how it went. It may be a written email with comments on, ideas, suggestions, all sorts of ways that feedback can operate. But it's important for you to be clear at how that will be for people. When should you give it? Well, again, agree this with your participant at the beginning when you're setting up that initial, agreement to be part of your team, or a contract, whatever you want to call it. Where are you mapping it into your research cycle? How are you going to give that? Is that going to be a newsletter maybe to people? Is that going to be a written, a verbal, a one-off, a regular thing? Work that all out with that person or with your team of people at the beginning. How should it be given? Again, very similar. Think about, is that written? Is it verbal? Is it at the time of the event? Is it at set times along the way? And what's really important, I think, two things is, if there may sometimes be negative feedback, you may need to give negative feedback. And, that's as much a learning curve as anything else, but just be sensitive, to how you offer that. And I think that's probably just stating the obvious, and I'm sure you all do that. But really be sensitive about how you offer negative feedback and offer it in a way that offers some sort of positiveness as well. And the other thing is to say is, it's not always possible to use people's ideas. They may come with amazing suggestions and thoughts, but for some reason, some practical reason, you can't do it. It's as important to tell people that. It's as important to tell people why you can't use their opinions and ideas and suggestions as it is as the ones you can, because otherwise they'll just think you've ignored them. So as well as feedback, we need to think about impact. So next slide. Thank you. Impact. So what is the impact of your involvement activities on the research process and its outcomes? Okay, so how did it make a difference to your project? Impact of involvement on participating members of the public and researchers. So, what impact has that had on the people? Have you built better relationships? Have you had better connections? Has it affected the way that you are now working together? What impact does that have? And also an impact of involvement on addressing power imbalances between the researchers and the researched. So, we're looking here at have those relationships that you've developed through your public involvement led to a more equal relationship going on and achieving a more co-produced research project than you might have done if you hadn't had those good public involvement relationships going on. How do we measure impact? Well, there's different ways of doing it. We could talk about quantitative in terms of numbers of people involved, numbers of focus groups you've held, numbers of co-design questionnaires or summaries that you've achieved. These are all metrics, but they don't really get to the nub of what's happened. We could use qualitative methods where you take narratives and stories, good examples of where people's ideas have made a difference. Some tools have been developed for use, and two here, the GRIP, which is a guidance for reporting involvement of patients and publics, and the PIAF, the Public Involvement Impact Assessment Framework. There's links to those later on in the presentation, so you'll see those. If you want to use more of a framework when you're trying to identify impact. But I think there are quite a lot of problems with assessing impact in public involvement, because public involvement can be quite a nebulous thing. It's about relationships, it's about people, it's about people's comments, it's about how those develop, and that's actually really difficult to measure. So, you know, you're not alone in finding it difficult to identify impact of public involvement. This is an ongoing discussion that's going on in the wider echelons of public involvement world. They've yet to come up with a really significant answer, but there's lots of ideas about how you can have a go and how you can try. So just to say that public involvement is a whole spectrum really of involving people, right from just asking them to review some of your documentation to make sure you've used appropriate language, through to them being involved in some of your research designs, through to actually being involved in the designing the questions at the beginning, and aiming for that true co-production. And I think Nadia is going to come in here and talk a little bit about co-production for us, for those who weren't on the session this morning.
Hi. I'm not going to take up too much time with talking about co-production. If anybody wasn't at the session earlier on, it will be available for people to look at, along with some additional resources like a co-production guide that we've put together, which is on the ARC website. Really, it's just to kind of make that link between public involvement and co-production. Obviously, there's many definitions of co-production, and you'll see more than one in the guide we produced. The ARC, we've kind of come to a definition of co-production, but in trying probably to incorporate every sort of setting that it can occur in, I'm still not convinced that maybe it works properly. So here is the involved definition, which is specifically around research rather than connected to service improvement or any other aspect. And that's about co-producing a research project is an approach in which researchers, practitioners and the public work together, sharing power and responsibility from the start to the end of the project, including the generation of knowledge. And I think the key words here are the sharing power aspect. Just linking back to some of the things that Pippa's already mentioned today, I think that there is a lot of overlap between, for example, the features of co-production. It's just using different words to describe them. So establishing ground rules, having an ongoing dialogue, joint ownership of key decisions, commitment to building relationships, opportunities for personal growth and development, flexibility, continuous reflection, and also, as she's just touched on, valuing and evaluating the impact. And, I think that that's where this overlap occurs. Next slide, please. And I think, whether you're able to embrace co-production within your project is down to these three questions. And if you can't commit to these, then we advocate pushing it as far as you can, involving the public and community as far as you can, using some of the means Pippa has just talked about. And I think I'll leave it at that. So thanks very much.
I'll say, before we finish, who can help you? Because you can't do this on your own. The very nature of it, you do need people from the public members and the communities to help you. So I would first say, look to your own networks, your colleagues, any previous connections you had. If you've got those relationships started, where people are, people within your knowledge area that you're researching, start with them. Ask them if they know anybody who's interested. Use what you've already got. If you want some help, we're here, the PCIE team are here, at the ARC, myself, Kat and Beth, to help you, direct you in the right place. We're very good at signposting you. We can give you information. We can give you guidance. We're putting together a guidance document. We hope to get it ready by this week, but unfortunately it's taken a little bit longer. But there are lots of other ones out there to help you. And we do have our own Karens, lots of Karens who are brilliant, willing to help us at the drop of a hat. The more notice you can give, the better. But we do try to help you if we can. And we are developing just a general pool of public contributors, people who have just generally said they'd like to help out with some research if they could. Look to your own organisations. What public involvement and engagement networks have you got within your own organisations? They are groups of people in all of these health trusts and local authorities. They've all got them. Finance is always an issue, so look to see what sort of financial support you can get from your own organisation. It's amazing how many little pots of money people manage to find if their arms are twisted. The NIHR website is a great place for information and connections, and they do have a place where you can put on requests for people to be involved in your project. Other NIHR research organisations across the region, so RDS, CRN, to name two, but other organisations that are going on in the region, they may be able to help you with contacts they have. And just to say that the RDS has a public involvement fund, which you may be eligible to apply for help with funding application, but they do have criteria. You need to check out whether you will be eligible. So that's just a starting point for where you can get some help. Do have a think about it. Next slide, please. Okay, it's a bit small. Sorry about that. I'm not expecting you to write any of this down because it's all going to be on the website, but there's a whole lot of information here that will be available about, some of it is interesting articles, some of it is websites where there's information, and some of it is other toolkits that other ARCs or research organisations have put together about public involvement and the things you need to think about. They are everything I've said today will be in one of these documents. So, there's plenty out there, but please don't get swamped by it. If you just Google public involvement, you will be inundated with information, and it can be a little bit off-putting. So just try and be a little bit careful in kind of where you look, because I don't really want you to get put off. So just to say thank you everybody for listening to me ramble on today. I hope that something I've said resonates with you. I hope something I've said is useful.